Thank you all so very much for arriving today for the Bouncing Forward, the Science and Art of Resilience webinar with my good friend and ex-colleague Michelle Hall today is with us to take us through this next hour. As you'll probably be more than aware, as it says at the top of your screen, we are being recorded. If you don't want to have your cameras on, please don't feel under any pressure to do so. It's just so that people that for various operational reasons can't make it today, they can still watch the webinar back. We are going to give it, I think, 1 more minute just to see if anyone else comes in and wants to join us, and then I'll be handing over in a second or two. So get yourselves comfortable. This is going to be a really good hour. Right. Super. So just before I hand over to Michelle, as I said, this is the Bouncing Forward Science and Art of Resilience webinar. If you could just flick to the next slide, I just want to thank our sponsors. We've got some new sponsors for the year 2025 on top of the offering that we had in 24. So this year we've been joined by RSE and also Windmill Insight Solutions. So thank you to all the sponsors. These kind of webinars and certainly the in-person events wouldn't happen without their support, both in financial and backing and support in that regard. So thank you to all of those. And now I have the absolute pleasure to hand you over to Michelle, who's going to guide you through the next 55 minutes or so.
Thanks, Claire. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Claire, there's someone in the waiting room. Do you want me to admit them?
No, I'll keep an eye on that. Don't worry.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So, as Claire said, my name is Michelle Hall. I am a data and business consultant turned career and leadership coach. I am passionate about supporting people to create careers they love authentically, with more impact and without burning out. And I'm curious about how we can make work for everyone. I'm also a wife, a stepmom, a puppy mum. Hopefully you won't hear him, an aunt and a friend. So today I'm here to talk about resilience. This session should take about 50 to 55 minutes, and hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. You can probably detect an Australian accent. I grew up in Australia, went to university out there before moving to the UK in 2003. And I've spent just over 25 years working in corporations in Australia and in the UK. And I started my business in 2023, so 2 years ago, because I recognised that I was being called to be a career coach and really felt passionate about helping people, particularly women, to progress their careers. And added to that, I'm now able to talk about things that I feel passionately about, like resilience, and hopefully provide a different perspective. What I recognised in all of the companies I worked for, be it large global corporations or small medium enterprises or family-run businesses, that all had a desire for their employees to be more resilient. But what they didn't have in common was how, or even if they defined resilience, and how as an organisation they would support people to be more resilient. So I'm curious to know if you could just use the raise hand or a different reaction emoji, who's been to a workshop, a talk, or training about resilience before? Great, a couple of you, fantastic. What I'd just ask of you today is to approach the next hour with a beginner's mindset. So just being open-minded, listening without prejudgment. I'm hoping that there'll be things that you haven't heard before, and that perhaps you want to chime in and either agree or disagree or provide a comment on. Today will also be a little bit interactive, just helps me know that I'm not talking to myself. So I'll only ask you to raise your hand or use the emojis. But if you do have any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat if you prefer not to come off camera and have a conversation at the end. So before I dive in, I'm going to start with a story. And it's not the story that I was originally planning to tell, but I will get back to that story. This morning on my walk with my dog Rufus, I was thinking, it'd be great to have a short, little, immediately present example of resilience, how my resilience has been tested. I also think that you should be really careful about what you ask the universe for, because when I got home from my walk, I made coffee, got dressed, came up to my office and realized that I had no internet connection. Nothing in the house was working. So I spent 45 minutes figuring out what I was going to do to get internet connection back. I've obviously got it back and it's hopefully working properly. But that tested my resilience. And then on top of that, our dog walker hasn't turned up yet, which I really would love her to be here today, because Rufus is generally very well behaved, although does have moments when I'm doing things like this of being a bit attention seeking. So hopefully you won't hear from him, as I said. So I really love this quote by Maya Angelou. I think it sums up resilience really nicely. I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. And when I think back to all the times in my life when my resilience was tested, it's definitely changed me, but I haven't been reduced by it. And if you take one thing away from today, I'm hoping this might be what you take. Hopefully there'll be more though. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to talk about why resilience is important, what resilience actually is, and how we can be more resilient, both personally and in our teams. What we're not going to talk about is how we can double down to take on more work, how we can push through challenging times and congratulate yourself for taking on more hits. And we're not going to talk about how to put up with behavior that conflicts with your values and ethics. Does that sound okay to everyone? You can thumbs up if you're nodding. Great. Perfect. Thank you. So, another quick story. 2 days after realizing that my first marriage was over, I was back at my desk pretending for all the world that I was fine and everything was fine. It was all fine. I was determined to get through the breakdown of my marriage by being resilient. I was a strong person, or I am a strong person after all, so I was going to be resilient. What I didn't realize is that for months on end, I was actually being privately self-destructive. You cannot have a smoothie for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and think that that is a suitable diet long term, and publicly painful to be around. My favorite phrase for months on end was, I can't wait for this phase of my life to be over. As if at some undefined point in the future, I'd feel better magically. And it wasn't until my mentor said to me, resilience is like a muscle. If you don't use it and nurture it, it's not going to be strong. And I realized after that lunch that it was her polite way of telling me that I could keep walking around saying, I want this part of my life to be over, or I could take action and do something about it. And she's right. Resilience is like a muscle. It gets stronger each time we use it. Excuse me. We are all going to have challenges in our life, big or small, that we will need to navigate. And if we do the work, our resilience builds and grows positively and gives us a starting point for next time. So at that point in my life, and we're going back almost 10 years ago, I unconsciously embedded some habits that increased my resilience. I really had no idea what I was doing, but it felt like the right thing to do. I re-established routines around sleep, exercise, meal planning. So we moved away from smoothies and soup for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I started to develop more meaningful social connections. I stopped spending hours aimlessly scrolling on social media, and I started to read more books. And since that time, I've read bits and pieces about resilience, but I didn't really think much more about it until I was diagnosed with arthritis, and then I was offered a redundancy at the end of 2022. And after that, I went through a phase of recovering from burnout and getting my arthritis under control before starting my business. And I think that's part of the reason why I feel passionate about talking about resilience, because too often, and in my experience, it's weaponized in feedback sessions. We're bombarded with images and messages about pushing through regardless of what life throws at us. So the content that I've developed for today is based on research from a variety of sources: Harvard Business Review, Positive Psychology, Forbes, and numerous books. And I've also sprinkled it with little stories or anecdotes to hopefully make it more interesting. I don't want to be responsible for you all needing to have a nap later on today. So let's start with why resilience is important. So this image is from Jury Rousseau. I don't particularly love it in terms of style, but I think the content works. So we'll start with the enduring factors. Success doesn't come easy. I think we're all present to this. And regardless of how you define success, it takes consistent time and effort. And what thankfully is becoming more apparent is debunking the idea of overnight success. The majority of us are going to face hurdles, whichever route we choose. And being resilient to generate the ability to keep going, gives us the ability to not only bounce back, or as I prefer to say, bounce forward, but to be stronger than we were before. I just want to check, is my internet connection okay? Are you all still with me? Great, thank you. The next one that can test our resilience is global instability and uncertainty. Now, I'm hoping and I'm assuming that you've all been subject to some form of news this week. So there's not a great deal to define here. But it's important, I think, to stop and think about the impact the news is having on us individually, and maybe think about ways that we can consume it in a way that works for us. And also think about what our role, however small it feels, can play in being persistent and working towards a better future. And of course, then there are the knocks of life. And we know that life can get lifey. There's illnesses, relationship breakdowns, new relationships, death, employment changes. They are all natural factors of life. Or the car breaking down in the Morrison's car park at 8 o'clock in the middle of winter when you're on holidays in Cornwall. All those things test our resilience. But proactively developing our resilience can support us to navigate those changes, to grow from them, and to support others going through changes in the future. And then there's emerging factors, so accelerating change. I think we all know firsthand how fast society and the water industry has changed in the last, let's just say, 10 years. Not to mention the changes that have happened from a technology and a data perspective that are impacting our lives all of the time. My first phone was a Motorola flip phone, so we're going back 20, maybe 30 years. I literally thought that phone was the best thing ever. Its sole function was making and receiving calls. And I thought I couldn't live without it. If you think about our phones today, they are literally a computer in the palm of, or almost the palm of your hands, depending on the size of your hands. But don't you find it takes continual learning to use your phone? Because so much of it is now DIY. You want to upgrade your phone, no problems, but the data migration, that's on you. It's probably a YouTube video. New apps, no worries, download them, but you figure out how to use it. And then think about our day-to-day at work. How often Microsoft or Zoom rolls out an upgrade. The functionality that you were using on Friday is often somewhere else come Monday morning. And I think it's embracing a continual learning mindset that is a ticket to resilience. And then we've got misinformation overload. I'm not even going to go into the Facebook news that broke yesterday and over the weekend about how they're going to deal with misinformation. But let's just say there is more misinformation and information than ever before. A study in 2023 by Heyday revealed that in 2022, we read 1.9 million words on our browsers. We looked at over 1,500 articles, but only read 300. We received 26 Slack messages a day, with emails, text messages, and face-to-face conversations on top of that. And what does that have to do with resilience, you might be thinking? Well, working on our resilience helps us to increase our critical thinking and problem-solving skills. That's useful to shift through this information to figure out what's accurate, what's useful, and what's not. The next one here is robot workers. So rather than R2-D2 entering the workplace, this is about the automation of processes and tasks, some for better, some for worse. And what it means for us is, again, continually learning new skills, and I'd suggest ensuring that the data those models or the AI is feeding off is diverse, so that they have a more nuanced view of the world. And being resilient in this respect helps us to stay clear-headed, to recognise the opportunities for new roles and continue our careers. And then innovate or don't. Let's think about business disruption over the last 20 years. There are brands that some of us grew up with that don't exist anymore. Because they failed to not only disrupt or innovate when disruption was on the horizon, they didn't do it when it was right in front of them. My 19-year-old niece stayed with us last Christmas, and I was somehow or other we got onto Blockbuster. So I was telling her about how we used to, when I was living in central London, get on the bus to go to our nearest Blockbuster to hire a video or a DVD, bring it home, pop it in the machine, and then having to return it a day or two later. She literally looked at me as if I was from a completely different planet. That's how fast things have changed. But you all know that. So let's move on to understanding resilience. It's a widely researched topic, but in my opinion, it's still wildly misunderstood. And it's when you consider that a quick Google search revealed about 833 million, and I'm not joking, results in 0.3 seconds, there's no wonder it's misunderstood. And when I talk about resilience, I'm often asked what I mean by it. So many people that I know and have spoken to have been told that in performance reviews, have told me that in performance reviews, they've been told, you need to be more resilient. It's weaponized as feedback. And I'd wager the people providing that feedback don't actually know what it means either. So what is it? Well, a bit of history first. It was coined by a psychologist, M.E.E. Werner, in 1973. And since that time, when you think about how increasingly busy our lives have become, psychologists, psychiatrists, leaders of organisations, social workers, ministers of religion have all become interested in why some people are better at bouncing back from challenges and hardships than others, and why some people can deal with more stress, seemingly, than others. So what is resilience? Well, it's the ability to recover from life's challenges and hardships. It's a dynamic process that builds over time through various experiences, personal skills, and social interactions. There's also a definition about the continued pursuit of goals despite adversity, and I'm not entirely sure I agree with this, because sometimes when we are going through something really challenging, we need to take a step back from those goals and come back to them later. Also, really importantly, it's a dynamic, not a fixed trait. And we're going to go on to talk about traits and states in a moment. But lots of resilience focuses on the big life events. But it's not just those that can be challenging. Think about your everyday at work. The overpacked calendar with back-to-back meetings that leave us dehydrated, dying for the loo. You know, I'm not the only one. Hungry and unfocused, and then we've got the constant flow of emails that lead us to feeling overwhelmed. It's the continual need to change and how we change how we navigate new processes or how we're managing evolving situations or projects. So it's complex and it's relative, which is why there is so much research into it and why it's often misunderstood. And by relative, I mean your levels of resilience may differ depending on where you are. So some people might be really resilient at work, but less so at home, and for others it's vice versa. And I think it's important to know that our resilience changes over time depending on our interactions and the environment, which is why I really like the definition of thinking of resilience as a trait, as a state rather than a trait. So in a resilient state, we can recognize that setbacks or challenges are not permanent. And we think about a state rather than a trait. I think in our mind, it becomes less fixed. So if you think about a personality trait, I think for a lot of us, that's something that we take to mean it's static. So if you have a personality trait of being organized or strong, that's intrinsically who you are or who you identify as a person. And if you don't identify as being resilient, then I think it lets us down from the get-go. So this is why I prefer resilient states, because as I said, in a resilient state, we can recognize that the changes or the setbacks are not permanent. We can hopefully see them as an opportunity for personal growth, and we can recognize that they don't define who we are as a person. We can also hopefully recognize that something that's happening that's testing your resilience doesn't have influence over the whole, over every aspect of our life. So thinking back to my divorce, that was very challenging in a personal and also a professional context. But when I got to a point where I recognized that actually it didn't need to keep impacting me at work. And actually, it was a great opportunity for me to explore different career opportunities and step into a career that I found more challenging and more fulfilling. And we also recognize in resilient states that we sometimes need to be flexible to change our approach. And that's why I think it's healthier and more useful to think about resilient states rather than traits. So, as I said, there's loads of research out there. And with loads of research comes loads of models and loads of frameworks. I fundamentally think that we need to develop our resilience in ways that work for us individually. It's a very personal process because each of us will react differently to stresses in our lives. And some people will bounce back quickly from one thing, whereas the same situation might take somebody else a longer time to bounce back from or bounce forward from. And unfortunately, there's no magic formula for this. But as I see it, there are 7 dimensions of resilience. So I'm going to go through what they all mean and then give you some examples. And what I'd invite you to do as I talk through them is have a think about how you can develop your resilience, thinking about these 7 dimensions. So the 7 dimensions, emotional. So this is experiencing and acknowledging our thoughts and emotions. The physical, hopefully fairly self-explanatory, is about our body. So replenishing our energy and nourishing our body. The mental dimension is about being able to thinking flexibly and focus on what we can control or influence. Purposeful is about being clear on our personal values. And I know that there's lots and lots of information in the world about purpose. I mean, the personal development industry loves talking about what is your purpose. I think it's important to know that your purpose can change over time. And it doesn't have to be an enormous world-changing, community-altering purpose. Then we have competence. So this is about understanding and utilizing our strengths. We've also got connection, so developing and maintaining a personal relationship with other people. And then spiritual. I really like this definition from Brené Brown. So spiritual is about recognizing and celebrating that we're all inextricably connected by a power greater than us all. So what can we do to support ourselves thinking through each of these dimensions? Well, emotional, like I said, this is about experiencing and acknowledging your thoughts and your emotions and your ability to experience them in a helpful way. And I know that for a lot of us, the feeling of what we call negative emotions is something that's really difficult to do. And we often try to stuff down those emotions and not have to deal with them. It's a bit like trying to fit more into your suitcase the night before you go on holidays, because what if you need this and what if you need that? And so you push all this stuff into the suitcase. Bit like emotions, you push those down, but eventually they need to go somewhere. And it's usually at some point that's really inconvenient, like when the suitcase lands on the conveyor belt and bursts open and everything you've packed flies everywhere. Not great. And I think understanding and recognizing our emotions also helps us to choose our response to a situation rather than automatically reacting to a situation. And I think having a sense of humor can also help. So physical, as I said, hopefully this is fairly self-explanatory, but for me, it starts with good quality sleep. Your executive function and your ability to be resilient is seriously diminished if you are constantly exhausted and you're not sleeping well. And then if we think about replenishing our body or nourishing our body, this might be different for all of us. I have some clients who love running. They find that great for creativity and unwinding and managing their stress and also helping their bodies to feel strong. I'll be honest, I am flat out running for a bus, but put me on a hiking trail, put me in a pool, I will happily swim and walk to my little heart's content. It's about what's finding right for you. And nourishing our bodies, this is also thinking about food, and this is going to differ for everyone as well. So a fruit or a vegetable platter might work well for some people. Others, probably me, I prefer a bowl of homemade pasta with a glass of red wine. Not in January though. Mental. So this is about your ability to focus and think flexibly with a realistic but optimistic lens. And it's also about having an action-orientated approach. So reminding yourself of your past resilience and make an accomplishment list if you need one. Purposeful, so knowing our values and aligning our life around them. And also being passionate about what we're doing is a really great way to help us build our resilience. We've also got competence. Now, I think in the context of work, but not exclusively, this is especially important. Having confidence in our skills and ability and knowing when to apply them is one of the best things that we can do to develop our resilience at work. And I think this is two-sided. So it's reflecting on our past successes, something which I think most of us rarely do, is a great way to build our resilience. And I think also recognizing and having the awareness of when we're doing something for the first time and cutting ourselves a bit of slack. And I think that those two things help us to acknowledge our current capabilities. I think a big thing here is also self-talk. If you're also speaking negatively to yourself, the outcome's probably not going to be brilliant, right? Connection. So this is about nurturing relationships at home and at work. And this can be really tough when you're facing a challenging time. Particularly if we haven't been encouraged to seek out support when we were younger, or we're running stories about not burdening other people with our problems. I think in this context, it's great to think about and be conscious about our networks at home and at work or in our community, so that when troubling times happen or you're faced with a challenge, you've got a group of people that you can turn to for support. And lastly, spirituality. Now, I know that this is probably not something that comes to mind straight away when we think about resilience, but spirituality is about the cultivation of hope and letting go of the need for certainty. I think across all of these dimensions, having good communication and problem skills are also beneficial. So what's the connection between coaching and resilience? Because when we started this conversation, I mentioned that I'm a career and leadership coach. And for me, it's a very cyclical relationship. So In a coaching setting, what I would work with clients to help my clients develop a clear, actionable plan without resorting to pushing through and overwhelm. And off the back of that, we look at developing coaching strategies that are bespoke and work for the individual, so that over time we're starting to build a deep-seated self-confidence that's a critical component to being resilient, and also fostering a growth mindset so that we can identify opportunities within the challenges as a way to bounce forward from those challenges. So my gift for you today is a complimentary 45-minute coaching consultation to support you to develop your resilience. If you're interested in this, I'd love to hear from you. All you need to do is send me an email at hello@michellehall.co.uk and we can set up a time to chat. So we've talked about individual resilience, and one thing I mentioned at the beginning was that I was going to talk about resilience at work in our teams as well. So individuals can build a reservoir of resources, which hopefully you're now more present to after going through the 7 dimensions of resilience. And I think, as do Danielle Kind and Megan McSpeeden, organisations need to offer proactive resources and create changes that help employees. So what do we mean by that? Well, resilience in our teams also has a number of dimensions to it. And I think when we're talking about resilience at work, it's really important that we're not resorting to coping by working harder and longer hours and sacrificing important parts of our life. Putting pressure on people and ourselves to keep pushing through and lifting our game is out of date and dangerous. And there are a lot of everyday things like commuting, back-to-back meetings, the constant stream of email and instant messages, phone calls, demands on deadlines that compete, that really do diminish our resilience. And it's no secret, hopefully, that we thrive in environments that are supportive. So as leaders or people working in teams, there are several things that we can do. The first, and I think one of the most important, is providing psychological safety. So encouraging employees or our team members to speak up, to share information, to openly discuss issues and ideas, even when they might be challenging. And I'd suggest, especially when they might be challenging. And in turn, we need to provide a safe space for colleagues and leaders to allow these conversations to happen. Psychological safety also comes down to avoiding stigmatism. So the development of a negative or mistaken attitude towards people who express, or when they express, frustration or anxiety or overwhelm at work. Let's be honest, we are all most likely to express negative thoughts stemming from someone who expresses what we think of as negative emotions in times of stress and chronic uncertainty. And I think it's important to recognise that just because someone's expressed those emotions, it doesn't mean that they're not resilient. I really think that for a leader, it's a useful signpost, particularly if that behaviour is out of character, to identify that someone in the team or that person in the team may need support, and then take proactive steps to ask that person what they need and provide the support or help them get it. The next pillar of resilience in teams is effective communication. I know it sounds fairly obvious, but how many times have we gone through a process or gone through a change and realised that actually not everyone's talking, or they're talking, but they're not using the same language. And so we're opening up to misunderstanding. I think for working in teams and being a leader, it's really important to understand what communication styles are present within the team and how people have a preference to be communicated with. Some team members will really thrive off having a one-to-one or a group conversation, and others will much prefer an email that they can take away and digest and think about and come back with their thoughts later. Supporting skills and capabilities, I think, is also really important for resilience in teams. And hopefully that also goes without saying, but it's important to consider the safe ways this can be done. A few years ago, the team that I was working in delivering a project for a client, we were asked to provide an update to the entire group, the business that we worked in, at one of the Thursday evening meetings. And a few of my team members had very little experience in presenting their work, and one of them had it as a development objective. So I invited them both to present at the team meeting that was historically and more likely to be done by a senior person. I mean, the onus very much was, Michelle, you'll provide the update because you're the leader. But actually, I saw it as an opportunity for them to be able to develop that skill and their confidence in a relatively safe environment. So I invited them to present. I helped them work up what they would talk about, put a couple of slides together. Don't get me wrong, they both hated me for it in the days leading up to the meeting. I know they did, they told me. But I also know they were really happy afterwards. One of them messaged me as soon as he'd finished presenting and said, I really hated you this week. I particularly hated you at 10 to 6, but thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to present, because I now know that I can do it and I know how I can improve next time round. It helped them develop their confidence, their self-confidence, and their competence in a safe way. The next one is about encouraging decision-making of autonomy. And I think, again, as leaders of teams, this is really important. And I believe it can be done safely to support team members to be more resilient. Let's be honest, whether you are there or not, a decision is going to need to be made. So the next time a decision does need to be made and you're there, how can you encourage your team to do it differently? Could you, as much as I hate this term, role play with your team that you're not there and ask them what decision they would make in your absence, and really understand why and work through the impacts and the outcomes of that decision? And just observe if it's different from what you've decided or what you would decide. So these next two might feel like they conflict with each other: clear roles and responsibilities and collaboration. Clear roles and responsibilities provides an element of clarity and safety of who's doing what in the team. But it also helps people to coordinate and collaborate more effectively. And it helps them to understand what they're bringing to the table, how they fit into the big picture, and the skills that they can leverage so that everyone in that team can collaborate together. And the last one is providing resources that can be easily accessible, such as support services, so external counselling or therapy, or just knowing who is in the wellbeing team and contacting them for support. At a broader organisation level, and I appreciate this is not something that we all have a lot of influence over, could be looking at redesigning processes and policies and the culture to support employee resilience. And by this, I mean allowing people to have more control over their working hours as far as possible and their work location. I have a feeling that as we're seeing more and more large organisations demanding their employees return to the office full time, that we're going to start to see more problems with a lack of resilience, stress, and mental health problems. And I think also within this, it's important to be clear about what the strategic priorities are rather than the nice to haves. And one final thought on this comes back to your personal resilience. I totally appreciate that in the middle of a busy day or week, taking time out to consider your resilience and what you can do to boost your resilience might seem counterproductive. Trust me, I have sat at this desk for very many hours thinking, I'll just get this next thing done and then I will go for a walk, not realizing that while I was focusing on pushing through and getting the next thing done, I was eroding over time my ability to think creatively, make good decisions, and be resilient. It's an interesting paradox. Overwork actually depletes the resources we need to lead and work effectively. And managing our work and leading well requires both hard work and the developing and maintaining of resilience. So when I first started researching resilience, front of mind was bouncing back from the big life events. And I really think that bouncing back is an inaccurate way of describing resilience, which is why I changed the title of this presentation to Bouncing Forward. When things happen to us in life, large or small, we don't really bounce back. We tend to bounce forward after a setback. We don't revert to the same shape that we were before. And the more I've read and the more people I've talked to, the more I'm convinced that we need to work on our resilience to navigate the pace of change that's happening around us and to know when to step off the treadmill and restore our energy. I've talked to you today about how my resilience has been tested in small ways. The car breaking down in the middle of the car park at 8 o'clock in the middle of winter, the internet this morning, my dog walker not picking my dog up, and then the larger ways, my divorce, being diagnosed with arthritis, being made redundant. And let's be honest, we all had to cultivate resilience to get through the COVID pandemic. As we come to the end of today's session, I'm curious to know, and I invite you to come off camera and have a conversation, what you're taking away from our time together. Perhaps you might like to write 1 or 2 ideas in the chat, and we've also got some time for questions.
The key thing that's been resonating while you've been talking from my perspective, Michelle, is talking about sleep. I think if I think to when I'm least resilient, I would say it's when I've had lack of sleep, but it's almost a vicious cycle sometimes, isn't it? Because you've got so much in your head, actually going to sleep is really hard. And therefore, we all I've lost track of how many of my teammates have gone down with the latest flu bug. And I've always said, go to bed. If you sleep, you'll feel so much better because your body has a chance to recharge. And yet, ironically, when you're most stressed, that's the one thing you don't do.
Absolutely. When you're most stressed, you're like, I know it's 8 o'clock at night and I really should be having dinner, but I'm just going to get this quick thing done. I've also woken up at 2 a.m. to write an executive summary for a strategy document because it would not leave me alone. And I got to the point of, I'm lying here thinking about it. I know it's 2 a.m. I know this is completely irrational, but I'm going to get up and write this introduction anyway. And then was devastated when people edited it the next morning. Does anyone else have any thoughts on today's presentation? Any questions?
Oh, one in the chat, it says the idea that resilience is a state is really useful, and also that going through difficult times changes us. It's not about getting back to where I was.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Sarah, for that.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm glad that resonated.
I suppose you and I, we go back a long way, but I read an awful lot. Are there any particular books that you'd recommend on the topic?
I really liked, I'm looking over this side because I've got my bookshelf right next to me. I quite like Resilience Recipes by Fleur Hazelwood. And I think I read a lot of books by female authors. So I think everything that I'm going to say is by a female author. I also think that Liz Moody, you can't really see that, she has a podcast which is brilliant. Her book 100 Ways to Change Your Life is great. So it has a chapter on resilience, but it also has chapters on increasing your creativity, having more energy, waking up better. And I think those things, like the waking up better, so that's obviously about sleep, sticking to habits. She talks about making your gut feel great. All those things contribute to resilience. So I think if you were to read one book, I think this is a great one.
Brilliant. Thank you. Just jotting that down before I tell you about the next one in the chat. Because my resilience is through post-it notes. I ought to have shares in them, I think. Right. The next one in the chat says, I liked how you broke down the different pillars of resilience. It made it easier for me to think of it in different ways and that can be tested, and how I best restore energy in that pillar. And Sarah's also said, I'm more of a podcast listener than a reader, so any recommendations?
Liz Moody does do a podcast, so I would check that out as well. There's also one from the States that I listen to every now and again, and I think it's called, I've got so many in my podcast thing. I think, it's called At the Table. And I'm pretty sure they have an episode on resilience. But that whole podcast, At the Table, is really great to listen to anyway.
Super, thank you. And David, I think you had your hand up. Have you still got a question?
Yes, I do. Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, David. Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah,
Hello.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Michelle. I'm especially inspired by your story.
Thank you.
It's interesting to learn that you went through all that, and you were able to come out victorious, and what you did, learning points for me. But I wanted to ask, looking back, how you navigated your challenges, do you think there's anything you would have done better or added to what you did to make it better?
That is a very good question.
Yeah, looking back here.
I think if I think back to the early months and weeks where I realized my marriage was over and we were separating, I would have got help earlier. So I really did procrastinate over that. There was so much going on emotionally, financially, physically, in a sense of my home environment changed very rapid, like overnight. And I think had I have sought help, professional help earlier, that would have helped. So it was probably 3, maybe 2 or 3 months before I went and saw a therapist, which was incredible. And so we separated in the September. I started seeing a therapist probably November time, I think. And then the following year, I was also doing a leadership program at work. So I look back and there was so much going on. I was doing a leadership program at work. I was going for a promotion. We separated. I then got some therapy. I had a mentor at work, and I didn't actually talk to my mentor about what was going on. So she kept prodding about, are you sure you're okay? Because I'm hearing stuff and you don't look like yourself and you're not acting like yourself. And it probably wasn't until my boss sat me down and said, this is just not going to work until you start telling people what you need, because you are not your normal self, obviously, but you shutting down and pretending that you can sort all this out by yourself is not working. So it was really leaning into getting help. And for a while I had a therapist. I joke about this, but I shouldn't. I had a therapist, I had a mentor, and then I had a career coach. And it was working, I think, more. The therapist helped from the emotional point of view. The mentor and the career coach helped me to spot the opportunities that were opening up to me and that I wasn't really present to. And so at that point, working with the coach and the mentor, I realized that actually I'd been in a job that I loved, but wasn't going anywhere and actually wasn't going to lead to a promotion. And I needed to start looking elsewhere, which is when I moved back into a consulting firm. So I guess my big takeaway is find help early.
It's that connection piece that you were mentioning earlier, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you very much. That's lovely. Thank you for the answer there.
You're welcome.
Any more for any more? Oh, another one's popped in. Another Claire. So sorry, there's quite a few of us in IWater, and we all work in water quality. Hi, Claire. I think understanding that being resilient isn't about being able to take more on is really important. You talked about managers using being more resilient as something that used in feedback. How would you suggest that you push back on this with your manager?
That is an excellent question. And I'll be honest, when I was told, I was a lot younger when I was told you need to be more resilient. And I know other people have been told this as well. I didn't push back because I thought, I did think, oh, I'm not really sure what they mean, but I don't want to look like an idiot. What I have learned with any kind of feedback is, I could do a whole thing on feedback. We don't have time for that. Feedback should be given in a way that supports you to improve and grow. So being told you need to be more resilient is really not going to help you improve or grow. And I think in that situation, the pushback is asking the person who's giving you that feedback, what do they mean? What's the context? So if it's, oh, I noticed last Tuesday in this meeting, you just weren't yourself and you weren't participating, that's a very different scenario to, I've noticed that you're coming into work looking like you haven't slept for a week and you cry at the drop of a hat, what's going on? You need the context, is what I'm saying, about why that feedback is being given and what that person means by being resilient. Because if that person means, I want you to take on more stuff and work longer hours and push through more, that's a completely different conversation, and that's not about resilience. Does that help, Claire? Great.
We've got about 3 minutes left if anyone's got any questions. Otherwise, we will give you a whole boiling of a kettle time back in your day, or if you're really multitasking, you could possibly manage both.
Possibly could.
Well, I personally want to thank you very much, Michelle, for your time today. For anyone who hasn't clocked on, this is one of 3 that are in the diary. So I would urge you to book on the other ones. I've had a sneaky peek at contents of all, and they're excellent. So I'm thoroughly looking forward to hosting these with Michelle. So if you haven't spotted the other ones, go on the IWater website and book in now. And equally, if you are a bit of a reflector and think later on of a question that you would have liked to have asked but felt you didn't have the opportunity to today, then just drop me a line, and I will make sure that Michelle gets your questions and sends them via email or gives you a call at a later date. So thank you very much for all of you. Enjoy your lunch, both the nourishing food as well as the hope for a break away from your screen. And we look forward to seeing you for future webinars in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Claire, for having me.
No problem. Thank you.